Solo Hunter. Chapter 1. The Breath of Immortality. The Master's hands were cold when they touched John's forehead for the first time. He was 3 years old, barely able to form complete sentences when the old man appeared at his parents' doorstep. They lived in a modest apartment on the edge of Seoul, or what passed for Seoul in this world, where the hum of traffic mixed with distant roars from unopened dungeons. His parents worked double shifts at a textile factory, grateful when the stranger offered to watch their son for free. They never asked why. They never asked what he taught. "Breathe," the Master said, his voice like wind through empty halls. "Not with your lungs, with your soul." The training began in darkness. The Master would bring dead things, insects at first, then mice, then cats. He would place John's small hands on their cooling bodies and whisper instructions that made no sense to a child's mind. "Life is not something that ends," the Master said. "It is something that moves, flows, transfers. You are learning to be the vessel through which it flows backward." By age 7, John could make a dead sparrow twitch. By age 10, he could make it fly. By age 15, he understood what he had become. The apartment was empty the night before he left. His parents had stopped coming home regularly years ago. The Master said he'd arranged work for them overseas, but John suspected the truth was darker. People who knew about the breath of the ceiling tended to disappear or distance themselves. The power was taboo, heresy. Churches across the world preached that life belonged to God alone, that to manipulate it was to spit in the face of creation itself. The Master sat across from him at the small kitchen table, a cup of cold tea between his gnarled fingers. "Tomorrow you will register with the Adventurers Guild," he said. John nodded. He'd known this day would come. At 15, you either registered as a hunter or found work in the mundane world. Those with even a whisper of talent chose the dungeons. The money was better, so was the status. "You will be weak," the Master continued. "Compared to others your age who have trained in combat, in magic, and sword arts, you will feel like a child among warriors." "I know, but you are not weak." The Master's eyes, milky with cataracts, seemed to see through him. "You are something else entirely, something the world is not ready to understand." John looked at his hands. Young, unmarked, ordinary, but he could feel it beneath his skin, the reservoir of life force that pulsed with each heartbeat. The Master had taught him to cultivate it, to expand it, to treat his own vitality as a resource to be managed and invested. "Enter a dungeon," the Master said. "Find a way to stay inside." John's head snapped up. "Stay inside? But the 2-hour rule is exactly what you need." The Master's thin lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "In the dungeon world, you will find what you cannot find here. Time, space, opportunity. The human world watches too closely. The churches have too many eyes. But in the dungeons," he trailed off, staring at something John couldn't see. "In the dungeons, you can become what you were meant to be." "And what's that?" The Master stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. "Something beyond death," he said quietly. "Beyond life. Something in between." He turned back to John, and for the first time in 15 years, there was something like fear in his eyes. "I have taught you the breath of the ceiling, how to give life to the dead, but I cannot teach you what comes next. That you must discover alone. In the place between worlds, you will find the answer, or you will die trying." He left that night. John never saw him again. The Adventurers Guild registration office smelled like coffee and bureaucracy. The clerk was a bored woman in her 30s who barely looked up as John filled out the paperwork. "Combat specialization?" she asked. "None." "Magic type?" "None." She glanced at him then, one eyebrow raised. "You're registering as a hunter with no combat skills and no magic?" "Yes." She shrugged and stamped his form. "5 nota registration fee. Your ID will be ready in 3 days. Until then, you can browse the E-rank board but can't accept missions." John paid and left. He didn't need 3 days. The next morning, he found a clan recruiting for an E-rank dungeon dive, standard goblin nest, routine clearing, profit split among participants. They were short 1 member and desperate enough to take a 15-year-old with no experience. The clan leader, a gruff man named Marcus, looked him up and down with obvious skepticism. "You sure about this, kid? Goblins might be E-rank, but they'll still gut you if you're not careful." "I'm sure. Can you at least hold a sword?" John picked up the practice blade Marcus offered. It felt foreign in his hands, unbalanced, wrong. He swung it experimentally and nearly dropped it. Marcus sighed. "You'll stay in the back. Don't engage. Just watch and learn. If you die, it's on you." "Understood." The dungeon entrance was a shimmering pool of silver mist in an alley between two apartment buildings. City workers had cordoned it off with yellow tape, and a guild observer sat nearby in a folding chair, documenting who entered. John felt it the moment he stepped through, the subtle shift in air pressure, the change in light quality, the way sound became both muffled and amplified. The modern world vanished, replaced by rough stone corridors lit by phosphorescent moss. The dungeon world. The clan moved efficiently, weapons drawn, formations tight. John stayed at the back as instructed, watching as they cut through groups of goblins with practiced ease. The creatures were smaller than he'd expected, barely 4 feet tall, with yellowish skin and crude weapons. They died quickly, squealing. John felt each death like a pulse against his skin. Life, flowing out. His fingers twitched. The clan pressed deeper. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. Time moved strangely in dungeons. They found the boss chamber, a larger cavern where a goblin chief twice the size of his kin waited with a crude club. The fight lasted 10 minutes. The chief fell. Marcus wiped his blade clean. 2-hour timer starts now. Let's loot and move. The clan scattered, gathering dropped coins, crude weapons, anything of value. John drifted toward the back of the chamber, toward a side passage the others ignored. He could feel it calling to him. The master's words echoed in his mind. "Find a way to stay inside." Marcus called out, "Everyone accounted for? We leave in 90 minutes." John took a breath and walked into the side passage. By the time they noticed he was gone, he was already too deep to hear their shouts. By the time the 2-hour mark passed, he was miles away, in sections of the dungeon world that no human expedition had mapped. The weakness hit him immediately. In the human world, his cultivated life force had made him stronger than average. Here, in this place where reality bent different rules, he felt it drain away like water through a sieve. His legs trembled. His breath came short. Every step was an effort. He collapsed against a stone wall, chest heaving. This is what the master meant, he realized. Here, I'm nothing. I have to rebuild from zero. The first night, if it was night, the dungeon world had no sky, only an ambient glow that never quite faded. He killed a rat with a rock. His hands shook as he placed them on its small, warm body and breathed. The life force flowed out of him into the corpse. The rat twitched, stood. Its dead eyes fixed on nothing, but it moved when he willed it to move. Level 0.5, barely animated, but it was something. Over the following weeks, John learned to survive. He animated dead rats to scout tunnels. He avoided the larger predators, orcs, wolves, worse things. He found water in underground streams and food in the form of cave mushrooms and the occasional lizard. And slowly, so slowly, he felt his strength returning. Not the cultivated strength of the human world, something deeper, something true. The dungeon world was changing him at a fundamental level. 5 years passed. John lost track of time early on. The endless sameness of stone corridors, the unchanging light, the cycle of survival that became his only clock. He aged but slowly. His body seemed to resist the passage of years in this place. He'd grown taller, leaner, harder. His face had lost its boyish softness. Scars mapped his arms and chest, souvenirs from encounters with dungeon creatures that had gone poorly. He wore clothing scavenged from dead adventurers, other humans who'd stayed too long, who'd tried to make lives in the dungeon world and failed. His army of the dead numbered in the dozens now. Goblins mostly, animated at various levels depending on the task. Level 1s for hauling supplies, Level 5s for combat when he encountered hostile creatures. He'd learned to manage his life force like currency, investing and withdrawing, never spending so much that he couldn't recover. He'd also learned that he wasn't alone. The dungeon world had civilizations, orcs with their warrior tribes, elves in their hidden forests, dwarves in their underground cities, and in the deepest places, the half-dwarves, a people caught between two worlds, rejected by both parent races, who'd carved out an existence in the margins. He met her in the 3rd year. The half-dwarf queen ruled a small enclave carved into a massive cavern where bioluminescent crystals grew like trees and provided light enough to farm strange, pale vegetables. Her people numbered maybe 300, and they watched John with suspicious eyes when he stumbled into their territory, half dead from blood loss after a fight with a werewolf. She was older than him, maybe 30, with the stocky build of dwarf blood and the sharper features of human ancestry. She wore her hair in intricate braids threaded with metal rings and carried herself with the authority of someone who'd fought for every inch of power she held. "You're from the other side," she said, not a question. John, lying on a cot in her throne room, managed a nod. "You stayed." "Yes. Why?" He didn't have a good answer. The master's instructions seemed thin now, insufficient. Had he stayed because he was told to? Or because some part of him had wanted to escape the watching eyes of the human world? The queen studied him with dark eyes. "You have the smell of death on you, not from battle, from something else." He said nothing. She smiled faintly. "We don't judge such things here. Half my people practice magics that would see them burned in the human world. But if you want to survive longer than 3 years in this place, you need to learn something your master didn't teach you." "What's that?" "How to take, not just give. The training took 2 years. The half-dwarf queen was a harsh teacher, but patient in her way. She showed him the other side of the breath of the ceiling, the reverse flow, the drawing in rather than pushing out. Life force exists in all living things," she explained, demonstrating on a handful of moss. As she breathed in, the moss withered, turning gray and brittle. Most practitioners of death magic only know how to spend their own vitality, but the true masters know how to replenish, to harvest. It felt wrong at first, predatory, but John learned. He started small, draining life from insects, from plants, from the ambient energy that pulsed through the dungeon world itself. The influx of vitality felt like cool water after years of thirst. His body strengthened, his reserves deepened, and he realized something fundamental. He didn't have to age. If he constantly replenished his life force, drawing in more than he spent, his body would maintain itself indefinitely. The half-dwarf queen had lived 200 years this way, she told him, and she would live 200 more. "You are no longer bound by human limits," she said on the day she declared his training complete. "In this place, with this knowledge, you are something beyond mortality. The only question is what you will do with immortality." John looked at his hands, the same hands the master had placed on dead sparrows 10 years ago. They were steady now, strong, capable of giving life and taking it with equal ease. "I'll go back," he said. The queen raised an eyebrow. "To the human world? Why? You'll be hunted, feared. The churches will—" "I know." He met her eyes. "But I can't stay here forever. This isn't my world. I was born human. I need to know what I'm supposed to do with this power in the place where it's forbidden." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There's a dungeon gate 3 days' journey east. It connects to your soul. I've had scouts confirm it's still active." She stood, moving to a cabinet and pulling out a small crystal vial filled with glowing blue liquid. "Take this. It's condensed dungeon essence. In the human world, it will be worth a fortune. Consider it payment for the entertainment you've provided." John took the vial, tucking it carefully into his pack. "Will I see you again?" he asked. The queen smiled, sad and knowing. "Perhaps if you survive what's waiting for you out there. The human world has changed in 20 years. New guilds, new clans, new hunters who've grown strong in your absence. You'll be a relling to a future that left you behind." "I'm ready." She laughed softly. "No, you're not. You're not, but you'll go anyway. That's what makes you interesting." The journey to the eastern gate took 4 days, not 3. John moved carefully, accompanied by a small retinue of level 3 undead goblins that he collapsed and stored as corpses in a dimensional bag the queen had gifted him. The dungeon world was dangerous, even for someone of his abilities, and he encountered 2 orc patrols and a young dragon before reaching his destination. The dungeon gate was a shimmering portal in a crystal cave, humming with energy. Unlike the entrances from the human side, this was a permanent fixture, a rent in reality that connected the 2 worlds. John stood before it for a long moment, his pack heavy on his shoulders, his heart strangely calm. 5 years in the dungeon world, 20 years in the human world. He was 15 when he entered. Physically, his body had aged perhaps 5 years due to the dungeon world's strange time flow and his own life force manipulation. He looked 20, maybe, but he carried 35 years of memory, of survival, of transformation. And he was 100 times stronger than the boy who'd walked away from Marcus's clan. The churches would call him an abomination. The guilds would fear him. Other hunters would see him as a threat or an opportunity. But he'd made his choice 5 years ago in an E-rank goblin nest, and he would live with the consequences. John took a breath, not the breath of the ceiling, just a simple human breath, and stepped through the portal. The light was wrong. That was his first thought as he emerged on the other side. Too bright, too harsh, too white. He stumbled, his eyes adjusting, and found himself in a familiar alley between apartment buildings. The same alley where he'd entered his first dungeon. But everything else was different. The buildings were taller, sleeker. The yellow tape was gone, replaced by sophisticated energy barriers that hummed with magical current. Drones buzzed overhead, monitoring the dungeon entrance. A digital billboard across the street advertised the Titan Guild's winter recruitment drive. Join the best, become legendary. 20 years. The world had moved on without him. A voice crackled from a speaker mounted on the barrier. Unregistered dungeon exit detected. Please proceed to the guild checkpoint for processing and decontamination. John looked down at himself. His clothes were a patchwork of scavenged materials, his appearance wild, his pack full of items that would raise immediate questions. He smiled faintly. The half-dwarf queen had been right. He wasn't ready for this, but he was here anyway. John adjusted his pack, feeling the weight of the dimensional bag filled with collapsed undead, the vial of dungeon essence, and 5 years of impossible knowledge. He walked toward the checkpoint, where armed guards were already moving to intercept him. Behind him, the dungeon portal shimmered and closed. Ahead of him, the human world waited, changed, advanced, and completely unprepared for what he'd become. A solo hunter. The last and only student of the breath of the ceiling, immortal, as long as life existed around him to harvest. John Smith stepped into his future, into a world that had forgotten him, and began to smile. The real story was just beginning. Solo Hunter Chapter 2, The Weight of 20 Years. The checkpoint guards wore armor John didn't recognize, sleek composite plating with embedded runestones that pulsed with defensive enchantments. Their weapons weren't the simple swords and spears he remembered, but modular firearms that hummed with magical charge. One of them raised a handheld scanner, sweeping it over John's body. "Unregistered hunter ID," the guard said, frowning at the display. "No active clan affiliation, no equipment manifest." He looked up, eyes narrowed. "You're either incredibly stupid or incredibly dangerous. Which is it?" John kept his hands visible, non-threatening. "Neither, just been away for a while." "How long is a while?" 20 years. The guards exchanged glances. The one with the scanner lowered it slowly. "You're one of the lost, then, the ones who stayed in the dungeon world." His tone shifted, became almost respectful. "Decontamination Protocol Delta. Follow me." They led him through a series of sterile chambers where more scanners swept him for parasites, curses, and dimensional contamination. A medic drew blood, checked his vitals, asked questions about exposure to various dungeon-borne diseases John had never heard of. Through it all, he remained calm, answering when necessary, observing everything. The world had changed more than he'd expected. After an hour of processing, they released him with a temporary clearance badge and directions to the Adventurers Guild headquarters. "You'll need to update your registration," the checkpoint supervisor said. "Your file's been inactive for 2 decades, probably flagged as deceased or permanently lost." John nodded and stepped out into the city. Seoul, or whatever this version of it was, glittered with progress. Holographic advertisements floated above intersections. Delivery drones zipped between buildings. People walked with confidence born of living in a world that had integrated magic into every aspect of daily life. Street vendors sold enhancement potions next to coffee. A child walked past with a pet slime on a leash. John moved through it like a ghost, his patchwork clothing drawing stares. He didn't belong here. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The Adventurers Guild headquarters occupied a massive glass tower in the commercial district, its entrance guarded by marble statues of legendary hunters. John recognized none of them. He pushed through the revolving doors into a lobby that resembled a high-end corporate office more than the dusty job board room he remembered. The reception desk curved along one wall, staffed by half a dozen clerks in crisp uniforms. Digital displays showed current dungeon rankings, active missions, and clan recruitment advertisements. Everything was clean, efficient, sterile. John approached the nearest available clerk, a woman in her late 20s with sharp eyes and sharper cheekbones. Her nameplate read Sandra Kim. "I need to update my registration," he said. She looked up from her terminal, taking in his appearance with barely concealed skepticism. "Name and hunter ID number?" "John Smith. ID number." He recited the digits from memory, wondering if they'd even still be in the system. Sandra's fingers flew across her keyboard. Her expression shifted from boredom to surprise to something like concern. "Your file has been inactive for 20 years. You're listed as missing, presumed lost in dungeon space." I'm back." She studied him more carefully now, seeing past the rough exterior. "You stayed in the dungeon world voluntarily?" "Yes." "For 20 years human time? That's..." She did the calculation in her head. 5 years subjective. You were 15 when you entered. "Still am, physically." Sandra leaned back in her chair, reassessing. Survivors of extended dungeon stays were rare. The fact that he'd survived 5 years and returned meant he was either exceptionally skilled or exceptionally lucky. Probably both. "Reactivation requires a 5-nota processing fee," she said, her tone more professional now. "We'll also need to update your ability profile, equipment manifest, and clan affiliation status." John pulled out the vial of dungeon essence the half-dwarf queen had given him. "Will this cover it?" Sandra's eyes widened. That's pure condensed essence. Grade A minimum. That's worth at least 50 nota on the open market." She composed herself quickly. "Yes, that will more than cover the fee. I can arrange an exchange with the guild treasury if you'd like." "Just the 5 nota for now. Keep the rest on account." She nodded, making notations. "Clan affiliation?" "None. Solo hunter." Her eyebrow raised. "Solo hunting has become significantly more dangerous in the past 2 decades. The average dungeon difficulty has increased by 3 full ranks. We strongly recommend..." "I'm aware of the risks." "Very well." She pulled up a new form on her screen. "I need to update your ability profile. What combat specializations do you possess?" John considered how to phrase it. The master had warned him that honesty about the breath of the ceiling would make him a target. But the half-dwarf queen had taught him that hiding only worked until the first time you needed to use your power in public. Better to control the narrative from the start. "I can reanimate dead creatures by infusing them with my life force," he said evenly. "It's called the breath of the ceiling." Sandra's fingers paused over the keyboard. She stared at him. "Necromancy, if that's what you want to call it." "I need you to be more specific. What's the mechanism? What are the limitations?" John explained, keeping his tone clinical and factual. "The projection of life force, the scaling levels from 0.5 to 100, the requirement to be within 2 feet to activate or deactivate, the drain on his own vitality, though he didn't mention he'd learned to replenish it by harvesting life force from his surroundings." Sandra took notes, her expression carefully neutral. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You understand that the Church of Divine Light considers necromancy to be blasphemous," she said carefully. "I'm aware." "However," she continued, "the Adventurers Guild operates under secular law. Reanimation of dungeon creatures for combat purposes is not illegal, though it is controversial. You may face social stigma. Some clans will refuse to work with you. The Church may attempt to recruit you for counseling." She looked at him directly. "My professional recommendation is that you join a strong clan, one with enough political power to shield you from religious harassment. The Titan Guild or the Dragon's Gate Syndicate would both benefit from a unique ability like yours." John shook his head. "I work alone." "May I ask why?" "Solo hunters face significantly reduced profit margins due to..." "Do they?" John interrupted. "What's the standard profit split in a clan?" Sandra blinked at the change in subject. "It varies by clan structure, but typically members receive between 5 and 15% of total mission revenue. Team leaders get 20 to 30%. Clan leadership takes 45 to 60% for operational costs, equipment, and administration." "And solo hunters?" "Keep 100% of their earnings minus guild processing fees." She saw where he was going. "But solo hunters also bear 100% of the risk. 100% of equipment costs, and face significantly higher mortality rates. I'll take my chances. Sandra sighed but updated the file. Registration reactivated. Your new ID card will be ready in 24 hours. You can collect it here or have it delivered to a registered address. She paused. Do you have a current address? The question hit harder than he'd expected. Not yet. The Guild offers temporary housing for returning lost hunters. 30 days, no charge. After that, you'll need to secure permanent lodging or pay standard rates. I'll take the temporary room. She processed the request, then printed a physical key card. Apparently some technology was still analog. 4th floor, room 412. Cafeteria is on the 2nd floor. Training facilities in the basement. She handed him the card along with a tablet. This contains updated guild regulations, current dungeon rankings, and a market directory. I suggest you read it thoroughly. The world has changed. John took the items. Thank you. Mr. Smith? Sandra's voice stopped him as he turned to leave. Good luck. You're going to need it. The temporary room was small but clean. A single bed, a desk, a bathroom with a shower that actually had hot water. John stood under the spray for 20 minutes, watching years of dungeon grime swirl down the drain. When he finally stepped out, the mirror showed him a stranger. 20 years old, give or take. Lean muscle, scarred skin, eyes that had seen too much. Not the boy who'd entered that E-rank goblin nest. Not quite the immortal creature the half-dwarf queen had helped him become. Something in between. He dressed in the plain clothes the guild had provided, simple black pants, a gray shirt, and sat on the bed with the tablet Sandra had given him. The market directory was extensive. Dozens of specialized guilds had emerged in his absence. The Inventors Guild, which manufactured dungeon equipment. The Alchemists Guild, which processed monster materials into potions and enhancements. The Cartographers Guild, which mapped dungeon territories. And most relevant to his immediate needs, the Market Guild. Established 4 years ago, the Market Guild had monopolized the sale of all dungeon-extracted materials. Monster meat, hides, bones, magical cores, everything had to be sold through their network. They took a 15% commission, but guaranteed fair market prices and secure transactions. The nearest Market Guild branch was 2 states away. John set down the tablet and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he would need to register for a dungeon run. Test his abilities against modern dungeon difficulty. Prove to himself that 5 years of growth in the dungeon world had translated into real power. But tonight, he simply existed in the strange quietness of being alone in a world that had forgotten him. The Adventurers Guild dungeon registry occupied the 3rd floor. John arrived early, before the morning rush, and found a young clerk processing applications with mechanical efficiency. I want to register for a dungeon run, John said. C rank or higher. The clerk didn't look up. Party size, solo. That got his attention. Solo C rank is not recommended. Minimum suggested party size is 4 hunters for C rank dungeons. I'm aware. The clerk pulled up a map on his screen. We have 3 C rank dungeons active within city limits. Werewolf Den, Orc Fortress, and Corrupted Temple. Which interests you? Werewolf Den. When's the next entry window? Today at 14 Oud. But I'm required to warn you. I understand the risks. Register me. The clerk sighed and processed the paperwork. You'll need to check in at the dungeon gate 30 minutes prior to entry. Guards will verify your ID and equipment. If you die in there, the guild is not responsible for recovery of your remains. Noted. John signed the forms and left. He had 6 hours until entry time. He spent them in the guild's basement training facility, testing his body's limits against practice dummies and weight resistance machines. His strength was exactly what he'd expected, roughly 100 times that of a normal human. He could punch through concrete, lift half a ton, move with speed that blurred to ordinary observers. But that was just his physical baseline. His real power lay in the breadth of the ceiling. At 13:30, John made his way to the Werewolf Den dungeon gate on the city's eastern outskirts. The entrance was a swirling mass of gray mist contained within a reinforced barrier system. Guards in the same composite armor from the checkpoint stood watch. One of them checked John's ID against a manifest. John Smith. Solo hunter. No equipment listed. He looked up suspiciously. Where's your gear? Weapons? Armor? John tapped the dimensional bag at his hip, a small leather pouch the half-dwarf queen had enchanted for him. Right here. The guard frowned. That's spatial storage? Let me see your permit. It's not tech, John interrupted. It's a dungeon artifact. Same rules apply. Technology doesn't function reliably inside dungeons. If that bag fails and you lose your equipment, you're on your own. John smiled slightly. I'll manage. The guard clearly didn't believe him, but couldn't find a regulation to deny entry. Sign here, liability waiver. Timer starts when you enter. Standard 2 hours after boss defeat. Don't be late. John signed and stepped through the barrier. The world inverted. He stumbled forward into darkness, then emerged into a forest of twisted trees beneath a moonless sky. The werewolf den. C rank. Average party requirement. 4 hunters. John opened his dimensional bag and withdrew 5 goblin corpses, laying them on the ground in a neat row. He knelt beside the first one, placed his hand on its cold forehead, and breathed. Life force flowed out of him into the corpse. The goblin's eyes snapped open, glowing with sickly yellow light. It stood, awaiting his command. Level 5. Combat capable. He repeated the process 4 more times. 5 goblins, all level 5, all absolutely loyal. A howl echoed through the forest. John smiled. Let's go hunting, he said. The first werewolf came at them from the shadows, 8 feet of muscle and fur, claws like daggers, moving with predatory grace. It killed 2 of John's goblins in the first exchange, tearing them apart with savage efficiency. The goblins stood back up. The werewolf hesitated, confused. Dead things shouldn't move, shouldn't attack, shouldn't coordinate. John's goblins swarmed it. Crude weapons found gaps in its defense. It killed them again. They rose again. Eventually, bleeding from dozens of wounds, the werewolf fell. John walked over and placed his hand on its still warm corpse. Breathed. The werewolf rose as his servant, level 5. Stronger than the goblins, faster, more dangerous. Good, John murmured. Now find me more. The werewolf's enhanced senses led them deeper into the forest. They encountered packs of 3, 4, 5 werewolves at a time. Each battle followed the same pattern. His undead army would engage, sustain damage, keep rising. Eventually, the werewolves would fall. John would reanimate them. His army grew. By the time they reached the midpoint clearing, John commanded 30 werewolves and his original 5 goblins. The creatures moved in perfect synchronization, responding to his will as extensions of his own body. They pressed deeper. The dungeon's architecture shifted, forest giving way to crumbling stone ruins, then underground passages. Orcs appeared, heavily armored and wielding crude but effective weapons. John's werewolves tore through them. He reanimated the fallen. Slimes oozed from cracks in the walls, gelatinous creatures that absorbed physical damage and dissolved flesh on contact. His undead adapted, using coordinated strikes to compress and destroy the slime's cores. More additions to his army. In a forgotten crypt, they encountered Death Knights, skeletal warriors in ancient armor, animated by dungeon magic. The irony wasn't lost on John, as he turned the undead servants of the dungeon into his own undead servants. A crypt creeper, a massive insectoid horror with too many legs and mandibles that dripped paralytic venom, nearly killed him before his werewolf pack brought it down. He reanimated it at level 7, spending extra life force to ensure its combat effectiveness. By the time they reached the boss chamber, John's army numbered over 180 creatures, 5 goblins, 30 werewolves, 47 orcs, 18 slimes, 15 death knights, 53 assorted dungeon creatures, 1 crypt creeper, and in the center of the massive stone chamber, coiled around a mountain of treasure, was the dungeon boss. A dragon, not ancient, not legendary, but young, perhaps 50 feet from snout to tail tip, scales the color of oxidized copper, eyes that burned with intelligent malice. It saw John's army and laughed, the sound like grinding stone. More meat for my horde, it rumbled. John raised his hand. His army charged. The battle was chaos incarnate. The dragon's breath weapon incinerated dozens of his undead in the first seconds, a cone of superheated air that reduced goblins and werewolves to ash. But John simply withdrew more corpses from his dimensional bag and reanimated them, maintaining his numbers. The dragon was fast, its tail sweeping through ranks of orcs like a club. Its claws shredded death knights. Its jaws crushed the crypt creeper's carapace, but it couldn't kill them all. Not permanently. And slowly, inevitably, the weight of numbers told. Werewolves climbed its flanks, digging claws into gaps between scales. Orcs drove spears into its joints. Slimes oozed into its wounds, burning from the inside. Death Knights struck at its wings, shredding the membranes. The dragon roared in fury and pain, thrashing, killing dozens more, but for every one that fell, 2 more took its place. John stood at the back, managing the flow of life force like a conductor directing an orchestra. Withdrawing from fallen undead, redistributing to reinforce the ones still fighting, maintaining perfect balance between expenditure and reserve. The dragon tried to flee, spreading its damaged wings, but the Death Knights had done their work too well. It crashed back to the ground, bleeding from 100 wounds. John walked forward through the carnage, the dragon's eye fixed on him, now recognizing the real threat. You're not a hunter, you're something else." "Yes," John agreed. He placed his hand on the dragon's snout as its strength faded, and breathed. The massive creature shuddered, its eyes closed, then opened again, glowing with the same sickly yellow light as the rest of his army. Level 10. The most powerful undead he'd ever created. The drain on his life force was significant, but manageable. He drew in ambient energy from the dungeon, from the lingering death surrounding him, replenishing what he'd spent. The dragon stood, obedient, awaiting his command. John surveyed his army. Most had been destroyed or damaged in the final battle, but he still had enough to accomplish what came next. "Gather everything," he ordered. "All treasure, all materials, all usable items, bring them here." His undead spread through the chamber, collecting coins, gems, weapons, armor, magical artifacts. They worked with mechanical efficiency, creating a pile at John's feet. And at the base of the treasure mountain, partially buried, John found something interesting, a leather bag. Old, worn, but intact. Inside was a single cube of crystallized light. The moment his fingers touched it, knowledge flooded his mind. Not words, but understanding. Instinctive and complete. Item box. A spatial storage ability far superior to his dimensional bag. Unlimited capacity. Instant access. Mental interface. He absorbed the cube, felt it integrate into his being, and realized something crucial. While the item box could store any non-living material, it rejected anything infused with life force. His undead, animated by his power, couldn't enter while active, but corpses could. John smiled. "Everyone stop," he commanded. His army froze. 181 undead creatures standing motionless. John walked among them, touching each one, withdrawing the life force he'd invested. Goblins collapsed into piles of lifeless flesh. Werewolves fell silent. Orcs toppled. Death Knights became inanimate bone. The Crypt Creeper curled into stillness. And the dragon, that magnificent young dragon, settled to the ground one final time. As each fell, John used his new item box ability to store the corpse. One by one, they vanished. Not into a physical container, but into a dimensional space that existed somewhere between thought and reality. 181 creatures stored, ready to be deployed whenever he needed them. John gathered the remaining treasure, approximately 50,000 Noda worth of coins and gems, plus assorted weapons and artifacts, and stored everything in his item box. Then he walked toward the exit portal that had appeared upon the boss's defeat. The 2-hour timer hadn't even started yet. The guards at the dungeon gate stared as John emerged, completely clean, completely unharmed, exactly 93 minutes after entry. "That was fast," one of them said, suspicion evident. "Solo C rank shouldn't be cleared in under 2 hours." "What happened in there?" "I killed everything and looted the boss chamber," John replied calmly. "Standard procedure. Let me see your haul. We need to verify. I'll be selling through the Market Guild. All materials are in storage." The guard's eyes narrowed. "Storage tech failed inside, didn't it? You're empty-handed." "Item box ability. Dungeon artifact reward." That explanation, at least, was plausible enough that the guard couldn't argue. He made notations on his tablet, marked John's exit time, and waved him through. John caught a taxi back to the guild headquarters, planning to arrange transport to the Market Guild immediately. Then he hit traffic. A massive accident on I-90 had created a bottleneck that stretched for miles. Cars barely moved. The taxi driver swore creatively in 3 languages while the meter ticked upward. 2 hours. It took 2 hours to traverse what should have been a 20-minute drive. By the time John reached the Adventurers Guild, it was after 18. He hurried to the main desk where Sandra was just preparing to leave for the day. "I have items and monsters to sell," he said. She looked up, surprised to see him. "That was fast. You cleared a C-rank dungeon solo in," she checked her terminal, "under 2 hours? That's..." Impressive. And then she registered what he'd said. But I can't help you with sales. The guild stopped purchasing dungeon materials 4 years ago. John felt something cold settle in his stomach. What? The Market Guild handles all monster materials and dungeon loot now. They have certified appraisers, standardized pricing, secure transport. It's much more efficient than the old system. Where is the Market Guild? The nearest branch is in Denver, 2 states away. She saw his expression. You didn't know? I've been gone for 20 years. Right, of course. Sandra pulled up information on her screen. You can take a train. There's a direct line about 8 hours. Or fly, which is faster but more expensive. The Market Guild requires membership to sell, but that's a simple registration process. 10 nota fee, though they waive it for first-time sellers. John processed this. His entire haul, 50,000 nota in currency, plus whatever the monster corpses and artifacts were worth, was locked in his item box until he could reach Denver. The train schedule? He asked. Next departure is tomorrow morning at 6, arrives in Denver around 14. Tomorrow. Everything would have to wait until tomorrow. Thank you, John said. Sandra studied him with something like sympathy. The world moved on while you were gone. It's going to take time to adjust. I know. John left the guild headquarters as the sun set, painting the city in shades of orange and purple. He walked without direction at first, simply moving, trying to orient himself in this new version of a world he'd once known. Eventually, his feet carried him to the old neighborhood, the apartment complex where he'd grown up, except it wasn't there anymore. In its place was a public park, well-maintained grass, playground equipment, walking paths. Children played on swings while their parents watched from benches. Dogs chased balls. Couples walked hand in hand beneath trees that hadn't existed 20 years ago. John stood at the edge of the park, staring at the space where his childhood home had been. Gone. Demolished. Replaced. As if it had never existed. As if he had never existed. A young mother passed him, giving him a wary look as she steered her child away. To her, he was just a stranger standing too still, staring too intently out of place. She was right. John turned and walked back to the guild. Room 412 was exactly as he'd left it. Small, clean, temporary. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of 2 decades pressing down on him. No home, no family, no connections to the world that had continued without him. Just a room he could occupy for 30 days before needing to find somewhere else. Just an army of corpses stored in a dimensional space between reality and thought. Just power that would make him wealthy and feared in equal measure. Solo. The word had sounded like freedom when he'd chosen it at the registration desk. Now it felt like exactly what it was, a description of his existence. Tomorrow, he would take the train to Denver. He would sell his dungeon hall. He would convert death into currency and begin building whatever life was possible for someone like him. But tonight, in the darkness of a temporary room in a world that had forgotten him, John Smith allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he'd become. Immortal, as long as life existed around him to harvest. Powerful beyond anything he'd imagined as a 15-year-old boy. And utterly, completely alone. The ceiling offered no answers. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him under, and he slept dreamlessly until dawn. Solo Hunter, Chapter 3, Hands of the Fallen. The train departing at 6 was older than John expected, steel and composite rather than the sleek maglev designs he'd seen advertised in the city. He boarded with minimal luggage, just the plain clothes the guild had provided, and the dimensional bag at his hip that now contained a fortune in corpses and treasure. The passenger car was half empty. Business travelers occupied the forward seats, tapping on tablets and speaking into headsets. A family with young children clustered near the middle. John chose a window seat in the back, away from everyone. The rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks began as the train pulled from the station. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating a landscape that was simultaneously familiar and alien. The basic geography remained. Mountains in the distance, forests, rivers. But human development had sprawled in new directions. Towns he didn't recognize. Infrastructure that hadn't existed. John watched it all pass, his mind cataloging changes until the gentle rocking of the train and the warmth of sunlight made his eyelids heavy. He'd barely slept the night before. The temporary room had been comfortable enough, but his mind had churned with calculations and plans. Now, with nothing immediate to occupy him, exhaustion claimed its due. He slept. John woke to darkness. The train car's interior lights glowed softly. Outside the window, night had fallen completely. Stars dotted the sky above silhouettes of unfamiliar terrain. He sat up sharply, checking the digital display above the car door. His stomach dropped. Next stop, Phoenix. 2 states past Denver. He'd missed it, slept through the entire journey and kept going. A conductor walked past and John flagged him down. "What's the next stop back toward Denver?" The conductor checked his tablet. "We reach Phoenix in 40 minutes. There's a return train departing at 23:30, gets into Denver around 6 tomorrow morning." John nodded, resignation settling over him. Another night without sleep, another delay. He disembarked in Phoenix, waited in the sterile station, and boarded the return train. The car was nearly empty this time, just a handful of late-night travelers, most of them asleep in their seats. John chose another window seat and promised himself he'd stay awake. The promise lasted 30 minutes. Someone was shaking his shoulder. Hey, kid, wake up!" John's eyes snapped open. A middle-aged man in a maintenance uniform stood over him, expression concerned. "This is Denver," the man said. "End of the line for this route. You've been asleep since Phoenix." John looked around. The train car was empty except for the 2 of them. Through the windows, he could see the Denver station platform, dimly lit and mostly deserted. "What time is it?" John asked. 2 in the morning. Of course it was. John thanked the maintenance worker and stepped onto the platform. The station was open but minimal. A few ticket kiosks, closed concession stands, empty waiting areas. Security guards patrolled with bored efficiency. He found a station directory and located the Market Guild's address. Then he checked transportation options. No taxis running this late. No rideshare services in this part of the city after midnight. The first bus wouldn't run until 5. And when he tried to find a hotel through his tablet's search function, everything within walking distance showed no vacancy in red letters. John stood in the empty station, surrounded by his wealth and power, with nowhere to go and no place to sleep. The irony wasn't lost on him. Then he remembered something the master had taught him. Not a combat technique or a refinement of the breath of the ceiling, but something simpler. Something he'd practiced in those early years, but never needed in the dungeon world. A spell. Tower of Heaven. John found a public park 3 blocks from the station, a modest rectangle of grass and trees wedged between commercial buildings. At 2 a.m., it was completely deserted. Streetlights cast pools of orange illumination across empty pathways. He walked to the center of the park, to a flat stretch of grass near a defunct fountain, and placed his palm flat against the ground. The words came back to him from childhood, the master's voice overlaying his own internal recitation. Not words in any language he recognized, but syllables that resonated with something deeper than speech. Power flowed from him into the earth. The ground trembled. And then, with a sound like stone grinding against stone, a tower began to rise. It emerged slowly at first, a circular base of polished marble pushing up through the grass. Then faster, walls extending upward, floor by floor, windows appearing as glowing rectangles of warm light. The structure grew with architectural precision, each level perfectly aligned with the one below. 13 stories. The Tower of Heaven reached its full height and stopped growing, standing impossibly tall in the middle of a Denver park, looking like it had always been there. John approached the entrance, an ornate door of dark wood with silver handles, and pushed it open. Inside was luxury that made his temporary guild room look like a storage closet. The ground floor was an entrance hall with a grand staircase spiraling upward. The floors were polished stone that reflected like mirrors. Tapestries depicting scenes John didn't recognize hung from the walls. Furniture that looked expensive enough to fund a small clan sat arranged in conversational groupings. He climbed. The second floor was a bathing chamber, a massive space dominated by a pool-sized bath already filled with steaming water. Soaps and oils lined shelves carved into the walls. Towels thick enough to sleep on hung from heated racks. 3rd through 7th floors were living spaces. Sitting rooms, reading rooms, meditation chambers, each more elaborate than the last. The 8th floor was the kitchen. John stopped there, hunger finally registering after nearly 24 hours of travel. The kitchen was fully stocked, cabinets filled with ingredients he recognized and many he didn't. A stove that operated on some combination of fire and magic, refrigeration units that hummed quietly. But he was exhausted and cooking seemed like an impossible task. Then he remembered the second spell. Hands of the Fallen. He spoke the words, feeling them shape the air around him. Power flowed out, and spectral hands materialized, skeletal, translucent, glowing with pale blue light. Dozens of them, floating at various heights throughout the kitchen. They moved with purpose, pulling ingredients from cabinets, chopping vegetables with knives that appeared in their ghostly grips, lighting the stove, arranging pots and pans. They worked with the efficiency of professional chefs, coordinated perfectly despite having no visible connection to each other. Or to him, technically. The spell operated on preset instructions, patterns the master had embedded in the magical construct years ago. John simply activated it and let it run. Within 20 minutes, the hands had prepared a meal that would have taken him hours. Roasted meat, seasoned vegetables, fresh bread, some kind of soup that smelled like comfort itself. The hands plated everything, carried the dishes to a small dining table that appeared when needed, and arranged them with presentation that belonged in an expensive restaurant. John sat and ate, watching the spectral hands clean the kitchen with the same meticulous efficiency they'd used to cook. They washed dishes, returned ingredients to storage, wiped counters until they gleamed. He was about to dismiss them when something caught his eye. One of the hands, the one currently polishing a serving platter, wore a ring. John stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. The hands froze at his attention, hanging motionless in the air. He approached the one with the ring, studying it closely. The ring was golden small, designed to fit a finger much smaller than a human's. Set into it was a tiny carved figure, a monkey in aggressive pose. How long had that been there? He'd used this spell dozens of times during training, hundreds probably, and never noticed a ring on any of the hands. But then, why would he? The hands were tools, servants, background elements of a utility spell. He'd never studied them closely. John reached out and carefully removed the ring from the spectral finger. The moment it touched his palm, knowledge flooded his awareness, not through words or images, but through direct understanding. Ring of Armored Monkeys, a summoning artifact. 3 charges, renewable with time. Each charge could summon a squad of magically armored primates for combat support. He'd been carrying it unknowingly for years, embedded in a spell construct he'd barely paid attention to. John dismissed the hands of the Fallen with a gesture. The spectral servants faded like smoke, leaving him alone in the kitchen with a ring that fit his smallest finger perfectly. He slipped it on and felt it resize slightly, conforming to his hand. Another tool, another resource, another piece of power he hadn't known he possessed. The tower had more floors to explore, upper levels dedicated to study and observation, a bedroom somewhere with what the spell promised would be an extremely soft bed. But exhaustion was winning. John climbed to the 9th floor and found the bedroom. The bed was indeed extremely soft, covered in blankets that felt like sleeping on clouds. He stripped off his clothes, slid beneath the covers, and was unconscious within seconds. Someone was pounding on the door. John woke instantly, combat reflexes from 5 years in the dungeon world, bringing him from sleep to full alertness in a heartbeat. Sunlight streamed through windows he didn't remember opening. The pounding continued, heavy, insistent, official. He dressed quickly and descended the spiral staircase to the ground floor. Through the door's viewing window, he could see police officers. 3 of them, hands near their weapons, expressions serious. John took a breath, composed himself, and opened the door. "Are you the owner of this structure?" the lead officer demanded. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who dealt with magical incidents before. "I am." "Sir, you're in violation of Denver Municipal Code 47B, unauthorized magical construction in public spaces. You're also in violation of Code 93A, creating a structure without proper permits, and Code 12F, disturbing public land without city approval." She pulled out handcuffs. "I'm placing you under arrest." "If I remove the tower," John said calmly, "can we call this resolved?" The officers exchanged glances. The lead officer frowned. "Sir, you can't just remove a 13-story building. The structural foundation alone. Icahn interrupted. The tower is a temporary magical construct. It leaves no permanent damage. That's not. John snapped his fingers. He spoke the dismissal phrase, and power flowed back into him from the structure around them. The tower shuddered. Then, with the same grinding sound it had made while rising, it began to sink. The officers stumbled as the floor descended. They grabbed for railings that were already fading, backing toward the doorway that was melting into non-existence. John stepped calmly onto the grass as the tower collapsed downward into the earth, floor by floor, pulling itself back into whatever dimensional space it occupied when not manifested. 13 stories compressed into 12, 11, 10, descending like a telescope collapsing in reverse. Within 60 seconds, the tower was gone. The grass where it had stood showed no damage, no foundation markers, no disturbed earth, no evidence that anything unusual had occupied the space. The police officers stood on perfectly normal parkland, looking shaken. The lead officer opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. What? How did you? Temporary magical construct, John repeated. No permanent damage, no violation of structural codes. The land is restored to its original state. She looked around, clearly trying to find grounds to arrest him anyway. But the park was pristine. No damage, no lingering magic her scanner could detect, no actual crime beyond the philosophical question of whether creating and dismissing a building constituted illegal construction. Don't, she finally said, voice hard, do that again within city limits. Understood. She gestured to her fellow officers, and they retreated to their vehicle. John watched them drive away, then checked his tablet for the Market Guild's address. Time to convert death into currency. The Market Guild operated from a massive warehouse complex on Denver's industrial outskirts. John took a taxi, driven by a young man who asked no questions and accepted payment in cash, and arrived just after 9. The entrance lobby was designed for efficiency. Registration kiosks lined one wall. Directory boards showed different departments: monster materials, dungeon artifacts, weapons and armor, magical cores, miscellaneous loot. John approached a registration kiosk and followed the prompts. Name, hunter ID, guild affiliation, none, primary income source, dungeon clearing. Hearing. The system processed his information and spat out a temporary visitor badge. Proceed to Counter 7 for membership registration, a pleasant automated voice instructed. Counter 7 was staffed by a young man with the tired eyes of someone working an early shift. He barely looked up as John approached. Membership registration? Yes. 10 nota fee. You get a guild account, access to all departments, priority appraisal services, and standardized market pricing. Waived for first-time sellers if you have merchandise to appraise today. I have merchandise. The clerk nodded, typing. I'll generate your account. What department should I direct you to first? John considered. He had approximately 50,000 nota in coins and gems from the werewolf dungeon, plus various weapons and artifacts. But revealing his entire haul, especially the corpses stored in his item box, seemed unwise. Weapons and artifacts, he said. The clerk handed him a numbered ticket and pointed to a seating area. Wait for your number to be called. Appraiser will handle intake and valuation. John sat and waited, watching the Market Guild's operation flow around him. Hunters came and went, carrying boxes of monster parts, dragging salvaged weapons, presenting magical cores in protective cases. Appraisers worked quickly, scanning items, consulting databases, making offers. Everything was efficient, professional, sterile. Number 73, a voice called. John approached the indicated counter, where a woman in her 30s waited with scanning equipment and a tablet. What are we appraising today? She asked. John reached into his item box, feeling for the artifacts he'd decided to sell. He pulled out weapons first, swords, daggers, a few axes with decent enchantments. Then came jewelry, rings, and necklaces with minor magical properties. Finally, miscellaneous items, a compass that always pointed toward water, a cloak that resisted fire, a set of lockpicks that never broke. He kept one item for himself, a staff-like object called a crystal spire, with crystal glass orbiting its top. Something about it resonated with his magical understanding, suggested future utility. The appraiser scanned each item methodically, checking databases, verifying authenticity. She made notations, calculated values, and finally looked up. Total valuation, 4,800 nota. We can transfer directly to your guild account. John nodded. She processed the transaction, then paused. You came from the werewolf dungeon yesterday, correct? C-rank solo clear? Yes. Any monster materials? We pay premium rates for werewolf pelts, fangs, claws, and if you encountered the boss, she pulled up a pricing chart. Dragon scales are extremely valuable right now. Shortage in the market due to decreased dragon dungeon activity. We're paying 8,000 Noda per scale. Dragon scales. John had an entire dragon in his item box. He reached in mentally, finding the dragon corpse among the stored bodies. With careful precision, he detached 2 scales from its hide, large ones, each the size of his hand, copper-colored and still gleaming. He placed them on the counter. The appraiser's eyes widened. She immediately grabbed a specialized scanner, running it over both scales. The device beeped confirmation. Genuine dragon scales. Young dragon, approximately 50 years old, excellent condition. She looked at John with new respect. You soloed a dragon boss? Yes. These are worth 16,000 Noda together. She processed the transaction. Your account now shows 20,800 Noda total, plus the 50,000 in coins and gems he hadn't revealed yet. His liquid assets were approaching 75,000 Noda. No, more than that. He'd forgotten about the residual funds Sandra had kept on account from the dungeon essence vial. The appraiser handed him a guild account card, a slim piece of crystalline material that displayed his balance when he held it, 155,247 Noda. More money than most hunters earned in 5 years. The appraiser noticed his expression, or rather his lack of expression. First major haul? Something like that. She smiled. Congratulations, that's enough to live comfortably for a decade if you're smart about it, or to fund a clan startup if you're ambitious. Her eyes dropped to his wrist, where the guild's automated system had already updated his status bracelet from plain steel to gold, the marker of hunters who'd earned over 150,000 Noda in their career. You're going to get recruitment offers, she warned. Every clan in 3 states will want someone who can solo C-rank dungeons and kill dragon bosses. Be selective. John thanked her and left, the gold bracelet catching light as he moved. The return train departed at 1500. John boarded, found a seat, and immediately felt the familiar pull of exhaustion. He'd barely slept in 2 days. His body was functional, enhanced by 5 years in the dungeon world, but even enhanced humans needed rest. He settled into the window seat and closed his eyes just for a moment. The screaming woke him. John's eyes snapped open to chaos. Passengers were pressed against the far end of the train car, shouting, pointing. A conductor was speaking urgently into a radio. Children cried, and on the floor next to John's seat lay a goblin corpse. Gray-green skin, crude leather armor, eyes staring at nothing. His item box had activated during sleep. Somehow, without conscious direction, it had released one of his stored corpses. John moved quickly. He grabbed the goblin and mentally triggered the item box, pulling the corpse back to dimensional storage. It vanished in an instant. But the damage was done. Monster! Someone shouted. There was a monster! The conductor rushed over, radio still in hand. Sir, step away from the seat. Security is being notified at the next station. John stood calmly. There's no monster. We all saw it. You saw what? John gestured to the empty space. This is the human world. We don't have monsters here except our own kind. The conductor looked at the floor where the goblin had been. Nothing. No blood, no smell, no evidence. Multiple passengers reported. Mass hysteria, John interrupted. Someone had a nightmare, started screaming. Everyone panicked. Check the security footage if you don't believe me. The conductor's hand moved to the camera mounted in the corner of the car, then hesitated. Dungeon-related technology was notoriously unreliable. Even in the human world, magical interference could cause glitches. The radio crackled. Next station ETA 15 minutes, police standing by. The police boarded at the next stop. 2 officers who searched John's seat area thoroughly, questioned every passenger, and found nothing. No monster, no evidence. Just a group of confused travelers who'd all claimed to see something that left no trace. One officer pulled John aside. Several witnesses say they saw a creature. A goblin, they claim. John met his eyes calmly. This is the human world, officer. We don't have monsters here, except our own kind. The officer studied him for a long moment, noticed the gold bracelet, noticed the complete lack of fear or nervousness. What's your profession? Hunter, Adventurers Guild. You clear dungeons? Yes. The officer's expression shifted slightly, not quite respect, but acknowledgement. Hunters who'd actually been inside the dungeon world were different from normal citizens. They'd seen things, dealt with things. Sometimes they brought residual effects back with them. Any magical items in your possession that might have caused hallucinations? No, it wasn't technically a lie. The item box was an ability, not an item. The officer sighed. Stay in your seat until we reach the final destination. No more incidents. Understood. The police left. The train resumed its journey. John sat perfectly still for the remaining, forcing himself to stay awake, maintaining conscious control over every aspect of his being. The item box would require more testing, more understanding. He couldn't risk another accidental release. He arrived back at the Adventurers Guild headquarters after midnight, exhausted and wired in equal measure. The building never fully closed. Hunters operated on dungeon time, not business hours, and the lobby was still populated with late-night activity. John headed for the mission board, scanning available contracts. C-rank dungeons, B-rank expeditions, escort missions, material gathering requests. You look like you could use a drink. He turned to find two women approaching, both in their mid-20s, wearing matching jackets marked with a logo of a rabbit with wings. The taller one extended her hand. Tana, this is Dee. We're with the Flying Sky Rabbits clan. John shook hands cautiously. John Smith. We saw you come in, Dee said. She was shorter, stockier, with the build of a frontline fighter. Not many solo hunters check the board this late. Couldn't sleep, Tana laughed. We know the feeling. Come on, first round's on us. You look like you've had a long day. Against his better judgment, John followed them to the guild's attached bar, a modest space with worn furniture and a bartender who'd seen everything twice. They talked. Or rather, Tana and Dee talked, and John listened, occasionally responding. They'd been hunting together for 3 years, part of the Flying Sky Rabbits for 2. The clan specialized in aerial mobility tactics, hence the name, and ran primarily B-rank dungeons. We're always looking for talent, Tana said, signaling for another round. Solo hunters are rare, usually means either they're crazy or they're skilled enough not to need backup. Sometimes both, Dee added. Their eyes dropped to John's wrist where the gold bracelet caught the dim bar light. Tana whistled softly. That's a high-tier earning marker. You've pulled in over 150K? Recently. Doing what? You can't be older than... She studied his face. 20? 15. Both women stared. You're 15 years old and you've earned over 150,000 Noda? Dee leaned forward. What the hell are you running? Ancient dragon nests? Just a C-rank werewolf dungeon. Solo clear. Solo C-rank at 15. Tana exchanged glances with Dee. Okay, now I'm very interested. What's your combat spec? John considered how much to reveal. Necromancy. I reanimate dungeon creatures. He expected disgust or fear. Instead, Tana grinned. That's actually perfect. We run aerial tactics, which means we're weak on ground control. If you can hold territory with undead while we handle elevated threats... She trailed off, clearly calculating formations in her head. Dee, what do you think? I think we should ask if he's interested in joining. I work solo, John said. We noticed. Tana leaned back. But hear us out. The Flying Sky Rabbits aren't like most clans. We don't have the standard hierarchy bullshit. Profit splits are fair. 25% per member. Leadership takes 10% for equipment and logistics. No forced missions. No mandatory attendance. And we could really use someone with ground control abilities, Dee added. Last 3 dungeon runs, we've had to skip entire sections because we couldn't hold position against swarm enemies. Tana pulled out her tablet, showing mission footage. John watched their aerial combat style. Impressive mobility, devastating attacks from above, but constant retreat when ground forces press too hard. We're not asking you to commit to anything permanent, Tana said. Just try a few runs with us. See how it works. If you hate it, no hard feelings. If it works. She shrugged. 25% of a B-rank haul is still more than most hunters make in a month. Dee nodded. Plus, solo hunting is sustainable until the day it isn't. One bad fight, one unlucky encounter, and you're done. Having backup doesn't make you weak. It makes you smart. John looked at his gold bracelet. At the 2 women who were watching him with genuine interest rather than fear or suspicion. At the bar around them, full of hunters who'd found ways to survive in a world that rewarded strength and punished isolation. The word solo had felt like freedom, but maybe it didn't have to mean alone. How many runs? He asked. Tana's grin widened. 3. If after 3 you want out, you walk with your share and we part as friends. What rank? B rank. We've got permits for 3 dungeons this week. Orc Fortress Shadow Temple and a new one that just opened, classified as unknown fauna, recommended party size 6, John considered. B rank would be more challenging than the werewolf den, more dangerous, more profitable, and maybe, just maybe, less lonely. 3 runs, he said, trial basis. Tana and Dee exchanged triumphant looks. They raised their glasses. To the newest temporary member of the Flying Sky Rabbits, Tana declared. John raised his glass but didn't drink. Instead, he looked at the gold bracelet on his wrist, at the 2 women who'd somehow convinced him to abandon his solo stance, at least temporarily. The guild bar continued its late-night rhythm around them, hunters laughing, planning, celebrating survival. And John Smith, immortal necromancer, impossible anomaly, sat at a table with clan members who had no idea what he really was. The word hung in the air between them, but present tomorrow.
Thanks for joining me on this new adventure. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel. I can't wait to see you in the next episode of the Solo Hunter series.